to the International Mokuhanga Conference 2017 in Hawaii. It's really exciting to have everybody here. My presentation is picturing this illusion and action in moku-hanga and manga. And I'm Karen Kunc. I'm a professor of art at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. We're gathered here at this conference to reinforce and celebrate and outline our moku-hanga family tree, to track the linkages, connections, history, and influences. And I see this as branches. Here's just a couple interesting random graphs that help us kind of visualize the interconnections of this visual culture and our interest. And it could even be complicated, as this brief reflection will outline. And I have several points I want to make. So these are just really very interestingly done charts of theoretical family trees. First, I want to establish my own grounding for my lifelong affinity for and influence from ukiyo-e prints created in the moku-hanga process, as I too make woodcut prints and grew into this process organically as a printmaker, experientially, by problem solving and reaching common solutions with great self-inventive processes, yet similar issues. They arise for all of us. The multiple block conundrum, the carving shortcuts, and adapting aesthetically the characteristic flatness enforced by the block, which is a peculiar and beautiful quality of the illusion of space. So I have some images of myself at work and interesting, beautiful blocks with all the inky residue. Yet I bring my own innovations, the use of stencils, roller blendings, selective inking, and the technical range of creative making. Making is the key word. In addition, I respond immeasurably to the visual aesthetic influences of blends, layers, richness of color, flat shapes that are keyed into an overall complexity, compositional activations along the edges of the composition as a conscientious direction of my body of work. I think I've arrived independently to some adaptations of moku-hanga techniques in my woodcut prints. Some of it is so logical, it really grows out of working, and you've encountered these yourself. You find shortcuts, you've invented your own efficiencies. I think some of them are such things as carving islands around the shapes and not carving all of it away, using multiple colors from one block, and all the multiple color effects, as well as subtleties and the patterns from layers. When I was a student, a long time ago at the university, I had 3 years of Asian art history, and I knew at that time that this was the influence that answered my own way of seeing the world of flat shapes. And this touchstone I'm showing you is paintings illustrating the tale of Genji, the scroll of one of the first novels of the romance of Prince Genji. And here I paired it with my own image of By the Falls. Here in this image, the flat planes of space and the patterning designs create a stacked perspective, the isometric projection. It's a simulated perspective. It's not two-dimensional or three-dimensional perspective. And this has become my way of thinking and seeing as an adaptation for how I see the world. Or is it an influence? Some of this is a question for me. Really, it's the way my mind is set. And I know many of you could offer other kinds of analyses of my work, and you're welcome to it. My work has a deliberate and recognizable boldness of how I see the world, and I use design for that translation. Here I'm showing the evolutionary stages of building the image place naming. This is a recent print. But I do use reduction woodcut printing, which is a signature approach for me and is not a typical moku-hanga method. Of special importance is the use of spatial illusion and depth from bokashi gradation blendings as a visual hook. This tends to organize the unmappable spaces and give depth and hierarchy to the chaotic actions that are often within my abstractions. Here's the finished print, place naming. 6 years ago, when we had the first International Mokuhanga Conference, I spoke of this aspect to many of you who were probably there when I did a presentation called Becoming Bokashi. And once again, I bring up that issue of the psychological ramifications of indeterminacy, which is why I'm so interested in this. It's the ephemeral qualities, the unknowns about those gradations, and the unwoodcut, woodcut effects that play with the stuff that's not carved. But it does play with the use of ink and printing magic, as we all know. This way, the sensations of making are experienced. And that's the prime point that I'm provoking with this questions of visuality and even eye candy in my work. I certainly acknowledge, as all artists do, the many cross-cultural influences that have come through my work. And often this is tied to, inevitably, the many travels and places I've been. I'm tying it here specifically to experience in Egypt. From one of my 3 trips there, I visited the Temple of Abydos. And this recent print, Essence of Abydos, is affected by the colors and the memory. And there's many other places I could cite as influences within my work. We could include Finland and Spain and Italy and certainly Mexico, all these other places, and Bangladesh is another one. So we know that inherently we have cultural differences. And often those differences can provoke misperceptions, misunderstandings, and an exoticism of the other, which could be perceived as an issue of appropriation or even remnants of imperialism. But for me, the opportunity to be immersed in a culture so different, so visually and graphically charged, becomes fresh for me. I become like a baby again, not understanding or being able to read in these other places, but being fully immersed in some other cultural heritage long admired and not being a part is a very interesting point and place to be. And others have engaged in this cross-fertilization of the printed world. If we think of the influence of the vernacular print culture that has certainly influenced artists in all of our cultures. So here I'm pointing out the advertising world of pop art, and it's similar to the print culture of Japan that operates on all the levels of high to low. It's an issue which continually dogs visual art since the onset of mass media. My art historian colleague, Dr. Kirsten Martinsek, who grew up in Hawaii, she has addressed this issue in her book, Pop Art and Consumer Culture, American Supermarket. She references Roy Lichtenstein, who was interested in the calculated simplicity and clarity of form that was dictated by the requirements of the mass printing process. The artist stated, "This comic strip technique is a perfect example of an industrial process that developed as a direct result of the need for inexpensive and quick color printing. These printed symbols attained perfection in the hands of commercial artists through the continuing idealization of the image made compatible with commercial considerations. Each generation of illustrators made modifications and reinforcements of these symbols, which then became part of the vocabulary of all. The result is an impersonal form." Dr. Mamiya states, "It is evident from this statement that Lichtenstein was impressed with the resolution of the formal problems through industrial techniques." He demonstrates this awareness of the codification of the format and the way in which the format of comic strips controls how the public reads them. And I'm making a comparison here also of the influence of Ukiyo-e from the low to the high, and we know of the cultural heritage that has happened in Europe with the influence on the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists, as we see in Van Gogh's recreation from woodblock print that he collected at that time. In contrast, briefly, I'm showing the emblem of my influences and what I see fascinating in Japanese visual culture, with this image of the Hiroshige print and the trained tree that I saw last year, or 3 years ago, in Ueno Park when we were there for the conference. This circular trained branch. It's naturally unnatural. One sees the relationship between nature and human effort to change gently the effect of making, the organizing of chaos, the natural patterns and its interference. There's a beautiful garden right out here that's of this same idea. These ideas similarly have been addressed in my work as issues for creative responses and artistic practice throughout my career. Yet, is it proper or politically correct to honor the other creative minds as artist to artist? How does an artist celebrate and question such strong affinity, but not being apart? The answer must be to teach respect for other cultures and to celebrate these blendings. So I acknowledge the various connections to the visual tradition of Mokuhanga through the West's romance with Asian cultures and Ukiyo-e prints. And I see that in others' works. And I will primarily use this as a selection of other artists that I want to show to you today, who are primarily my students over many years. Some who work with woodcut, some of them are no longer, but most of them still are. So I see them and this as part of a continuum. These are two recent woodblock prints that I'm showing you to contrast the geometric structure of the branches that have been tweaked to have angles and sharpness compared to the curvilinear forms that are growing from natural forces. Wind growth versus pruning, in essence. So I've been watching others take woodblock printmaking into further explorations, distortions, and even new illusions from the source. And that shared woodblock fascination that we have. Is the source me? Is it they were my students? Is it other things that they've absorbed these influence by talking with me, but they've turned it into their own unique reflections? And of course, I could include many other people that I've taught in lots of different situations, including some of you here. So it's been a really interesting path to watch this influence all around the world. So one branch of the Mokuhanga family tree that I want to consider first is the picturing experience. How things are made, how visual sensations and awareness and subtleties. You see my points that I'm seeing about illusion, visual sensitivity, the ephemeral. It's very introspective, and you'll see this in some of the works I'll show. But I think this experience is about how to see. So Brian Curling is one of my students. He came from Kentucky. He's currently living in Dresden, near Dresden, Germany. He did participate in the Me Lab residency a few years back. He's attended one of these conferences before. Surely I know of Brian's consistent love of nature, and you can see that in his linear silhouettes of branches, and he's seeing the ephemeral qualities of nature. his lineage is to the essence of life and natural forms. That's something that we know of in the Ukiyo-e prints. Another young artist is Kirsten Martinsek. She's currently living in Columbia, Missouri. She's taught at several universities and around the country, currently raising her young child. In her graphic effects, I think there's the concept of the whole feeling of body immersion, certainly into the swimming pool essence that she's making. It's about the feeling of how the body is floating, and this radiant color certainly implies that sensation. But it leads in her work to ideas about what the body would wear, the clothing, the obsession about the patterns, the nostalgia of these costumes. And we certainly know that is a abiding interest in the Ukiyo-e prints too. I think it's about revealing and concealing in a similar way to the use of the human form in Japanese prints. So she creates these sewn garments from paper with printing on them. She's done shirts and swimming wear and underpants and plaid t-shirts. Cather Pusey also was with me last time we had the Mokuhanga Conference. Cathy lives in Logan, Utah and teaches at Utah State University. She has always been interested in the unusual life forms, the potential of the seed, the desiccation of the life force in these withered branches. Recently, her project is to remake and honor the tree itself, the tree that gave its life up for her to make the art. So it's a very much a knowing that her making has a meaning. It's very labor intensive to make a print, then remount the print back onto these chunks of wood and create this respect for that life force. Sarah Tabard is an artist who grew up in Alaska. She's living in Fairbanks, Alaska now. Of course, you can imagine surrounded by the natural forces, the massive forces in Alaska. And I keep thinking of entangled forests, the fallen life forms that she sees as she takes her dogs snow sledding throughout the long winter. So she's contrasting some of those forms with the blank walls of human settlement and isolation. She sees the bones of the forest, the massive negative shapes of the snow, and the life struggle of seasons in a relentless environment. She makes us aware of these vulnerabilities of humans in that vast landscape. Now I want to continue to spin this idea further with the other direction, the picture this, with the emphasis on this, which goes into the branch that invites us to draw attention to something specific that the artist wants to convey. The precedents and developments that we see as interconnections between moku-hanga and manga, and to calculate again the high-low relationship with visual art and visual culture. So another inventive family tree. We're seeing specifics, the storytelling. It's actually the sensational that is certainly part of the woodblock printing tradition. I talk about the efficiency of messages that can happen with this process. And it's about what to see in contrast to how to see. So Doug Dowd is a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, where he teaches visual culture, visual communications actually. His works are these travelogue views. He's looking specifically to the everyday, the crowded sights and sounds, the changing visual landscape, and it's very human-centric, not nature, There's a lot of absurdities, nostalgia, the stories that he's pointing out, the foibles of society and politics. And it's an interesting contrast with this print that was done also at the time of introductions of new technologies into Japan on the opening of Western influences. The artist Nancy Palmeri teaches at the University of Texas in Arlington, and she's offering spiritual intensities and psychological nature of humans and our deep stories, and asking about what makes us who we are, with impersonal tensions. I think there's a religious overtone that comes into her works. And she's certainly talking and pointing out the political questions and satire with these narrator, the cartoon character as a narrator, and almost having a zombie-like populace. So the social political message and the critique of social conditions. And it certainly fits with this dramatic view of the Utagawa print that is a staged setting, a dramatic setting. Josh Norton is an artist who's living in Minneapolis. He grew up there and is now, I think he's working independently. His works certainly show a Western drama done in a woodblock style, so it's kind of updated the story. He has the loner hero, protagonist, and loves the blood and guts and the narrative story cycle. So it's very sensational and lurid with all of these colors. He also is interested in all the known monsters and characters that come from all kinds of pop culture. There's Dracula and Bigfoot and I don't know what that girl is, werewolf or something. So he's reinforcing the popular culture iconography of the anti-heroes that come from the low side. And pretty interesting to compare. We can find many monsters and ghost stories in woodblock print tradition. Wanda Ewing taught at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and she passed away just a couple of years ago and from cancer at a relatively young age, so people were quite saddened about her and recognizing the influence of her questions about the standards of beauty. These are, in essence, self-portraits. She's exaggerating what lengths women must go through and the exoticism of the female. And these are almost clown-like poses that exaggerate that relationship. Her questions about beauty have led her to this invention of mythical magazines with all these pop themes and impossibilities. So even questioning how the ideal beauty is impossible. And as we transition to looking at manga, it's full of all these impossible, exaggerated figures and forms. They have no noses, and their eyes are so big. It's just worthy of criticism. Nick Sporer is teaching at the Fresno State College in California. And Nick creates a specific narrative often with his characters. They recur in series, and you are really captivated by the expressive face colors that blush and emphasize their moody actions and defenses. I think we identify very easily, maybe it's his personification of the forlorn, the characters that present themselves almost as a mirror to us. And it's really relating to these beautiful figures like the Yoshitoshi print with the coloration on the makeup. And Ann Burton, who was to present with me at this conference and was not able to come, she teaches at Metro Community College in Omaha. Anne presents fragments of the stage. She is interested in all the action-adventure from nostalgic magazines and in this illustrational style that we know is meant to catch attention and tell of behaviors and the heroes. She embraces the manga style of sections that are cut off into cinematic frames that move the action. It's action that's within each frame, but it's also outside of the frame. So it's like a play in a frozen moment, but a graphic stylization of movement. She teaches her students how the Mokuhanga printmakers were masters of this spatial tension that create striking graphic representations. And I'm reasserting myself back into this, picturing this branch, because I can see my work in this side as well. My works can be very dense, and I would even ascribe to horror vacui. That's the term that means filled, a fear of empty spaces. So every space has some kind of energy. It's the result of the cutting marks, and I'm activating and questioning every millimeter of the surface of the paper. These are two recent prints that on the waves of this beautiful landscape come all kinds of exaggerations and display of our wealth and riches that are tenuous and could float away at any moment, are the strange kinds of forms that I'm inventing that could be from nature or biology or human constructions, our vanity. And I'm comparing it to this prototype of a chaotic scene in this print by Yoshitoshi. Its underlying motions are also on waves of action, very dramatic, and a lot of visual conflicts, but it matches the story and the message of this battle. It seems that a major legacy of Mokuhanga and Ukiyo-e is the popularization of manga nowadays. This fascination with manga stylistically is really evident in so many of these how-to books where the budding artist can rely on the known symbol, and just like we were quoting with the pop artist, it becomes a symbol structure that many people can imitate and copy. This drawing style is very efficient due to the repetitions, the codification, and the ideas that fit into categories. The images are graphically sensational due to these contrasts and the negative-positive game. And of course, there is the shock value, the transgressive, and even titillation sensation that is certainly part of the Ukiyo-e traditions. This popularity is such that I don't even realize when I started looking at tattoo art, those that are willing to have these permanent tattoos and in turn turn this illusion again into some kind of vividly etched story on their bodies. And it's interesting, we have both the lurid drama on one side and there's a serene landscape on somebody else's skin. Now, pop society everywhere is responding to the design qualities, the compositions, and the cross-fertilization between the moku-hanga and the manga in this lurid drama that's being depicted here in beautifully crafted woodblock prints of the Star Wars series, and wonderfully executed, but produced by a publishing house. I don't think it had an individual artist attributed to it. Somebody in the house did this. And even there's artists that are, again, using those moku-hanga styles, but it's not a woodblock print. It's a screen print, or it could be done in the painting style again, which is certainly part of the heritage and relationship between Asian painting and printing. So finally, these branches or streams reflect actually the very strings of our DNA. It's part of the continuum of the hand and technological efficiencies of making. Some of us are more drawn to this side of the experiential side, and some to the other side, the bold, in-your-face side of storytelling. Can our medium and influences serve as a bridge between and continue this cross-fertilization, as this certainly is part of our technological time? We are here right now at this meeting for this time of collective questions at this forum, and we all ask and explain why this process and legacy of such a significant visual culture as Japanese moku-hanga suits us. Is it a reflection on a graphic world of a time and technique, or a fluidly adaptable re-articulation of this engaging medium? I see these trends are all equal parts of being human, being inventive, and part of our personal quest to understand the nature of the world. Thank you.